This is a restricted area, sir. Full military honors funeral, General Sterling. If your name isn't on the list, you can't enter. The young military police officer, barely out of his teens, delivered the line with practiced firmness, a textbook monotone that carried a hint of boredom beneath the professionalism. His eyes, clear but uninterested, barely glanced at the old man before him. He saw what he was trained to see, an anomaly. He saw a worn figure in a uniform that didn't quite fit the current regulations, too old, too faded, the cut decades out of style. The desert bead used, the chocolate chip camo, screamed of a bygone era, a war fought before this young MP was even born. He registered the stooped shoulders, the quiet demeanor, the lack of assertive credentials. Just another old-timer, perhaps confused, perhaps a wannabe drawn by the pomp and circumstance of a 4-star's farewell but lacking the necessary golden ticket. Out of place, out of time. The old man, Arthur Jenkins, didn't argue. He didn't puff out his chest or flash old, laminated ID cards that wouldn't scan. He didn't plead his case or drop names that might or might not resonate. He had spent a lifetime moving unseen, unheard, and old habits died hard even when they worked against him. He simply stood there, a quiet, unmovable presence against the imposing black iron gates of Arlington National Cemetery, his hand, gnarled, a roadmap of age and hardship, holding a single, pressed desert rose. Its petals were papery, almost translucent, its color faded to a soft, dusty pink, a fragile memento from a world of sand and fire. Inside those gates, under the vast, solemn canvas of the Virginia sky, the ceremony was a meticulously orchestrated display of national grief, a ballet of precision and protocol. Cameras flashed discreetly, capturing the solemn faces of senators and ambassadors. Medals gleamed like constellations on chests puffed with pride and sorrow. Flags, held high and taut by honor guards whose movements were poetry in motion, rippled in the gentle breeze, their scarlet and white a vivid splash against the endless green. This was a farewell for General Robert "Bob" Sterling, a man hailed as a national hero, a titan of strategy, and the nation was paying its respects in the grandest manner possible. No one noticed the man outside. No one saw the quiet dignity etched into his weathered face, the weight of unspoken history in his slightly stooped shoulders. No one saw the desert rose. No one, that is, except one man. A man standing near the flag-draped casket, a man whose own shoulders bore the weight of 3 stars, General James McGregor. He saw the patch first, a flicker of movement catching his eye, then he saw the man, and a jolt went through him, a shock that momentarily silenced the chaplain's voice in his ears. He saw and he knew. And a moment later, he would stop the entire, elaborate ceremony, a gasp rippling through the assembled elite, a pause in the relentless march of protocol, just to walk out and render the sharpest, most heartfelt salute of his life to the forgotten soldier standing alone outside the gates. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where we believe every act of courage deserves remembrance, every silent sacrifice a voice. Let's delve into what truly unfolded on that poignant day, a story hidden beneath the headlines and behind the guarded gates. The sky over Arlington, Virginia, was a high, clear blue, the kind that makes the white marble of the headstones almost blindingly bright, each one a stark, silent testament. It was late spring, and the meticulously kept grounds were a symphony of green, lush and vibrant, a stark contrast to the somber black of the limousines arriving in a steady stream and the deep blues and greens of the dress uniforms. A gentle breeze whispered through the ancient oaks, trees that had witnessed countless farewells, stirring the thousands of American flags dotting the hillsides, each one representing a life given, a story ended. Inside the amphitheater and along the pathways, hundreds had gathered, the Joint Chiefs, cabinet members, foreign military attaches, soldiers young and old, their faces etched with a practiced solemnity required by the occasion. Today was the final farewell for General Robert "Bob" Sterling. He was more than a 3-star general, he was an institution, a strategist whose brilliance had shaped campaigns in deserts and mountains, a leader revered and sometimes feared by his troops. He was a man decorated with every honor the nation could bestow, lauded in the press, a figure larger than life, even in death. His state funeral, befitting his rank and service, had drawn an audience reserved for the nation's most esteemed figures. Security was, understandably, airtight, a fortress of procedure. Names were cross-referenced on digital tablets by stony-faced personnel. ID badges were scanned under watchful eyes. Sharp-eyed MPs, polished and implacable, stood like statues at every checkpoint. No one was admitted without prior, verified clearance. No exceptions. Not even for Franklin Hayes or Arthur Jenkins, as he was now known, a name he'd adopted decades ago, seeking an anonymity that suited him better than his given one. At the far edge of the main gate, under the indifferent gaze of a soaring bronze eagle statue, stood Arthur. His desert BDU uniform was faded but immaculately pressed, a ritual he'd never abandoned. The chocolate-chip fabric, once a blend of desert browns and tans, had softened over 30 years to muted earth tones, and the buttons, though polished, were worn smooth. But the creases were sharp, the old desert boots shined to a dull gleam, the patrol cap set at the correct, disciplined angle. Arthur wore no medals, he'd refused them all. No ribbons. Just a single, subdued unit patch on his shoulder, a stylized ghost half-hidden in a crosshair. It was the mark of the Phantoms, a long-range surveillance LRS unit whose exploits during Desert Storm were legendary in certain circles but officially non-existent in most records. And in his wrinkled hand he clutched that single desert rose. He'd taken the bus that morning, an 8-hour, bone-jarring journey from Millfield, a small, forgotten town in the hills of Ohio. He transferred twice, in Pittsburgh and then in D.C., before a local bus dropped him nearly a mile from Arlington's entrance. He hadn't called ahead, he didn't know who to call. His world wasn't one of lists and clearances. He hadn't asked for a ride, he wouldn't have known who to ask, and pride wouldn't have let him. He had simply come, pulled by an old, unspoken promise, a debt of memory, to say goodbye to the man he knew not as a general but as a terrified young lieutenant named Bob, huddled behind a burning Humvee in the Iraqi sand. Arthur approached the gate slowly, his gait stiff but steady, until the young MP stepped forward, his hand held up, barring his path with practiced ease. "I'm sorry, sir. This area is restricted for the private funeral service. Are you on the guest list?" Arthur blinked. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, clouded with age but still holding a deep, quiet focus, the look of a man who had seen too much to be easily rattled. "No," he said, his voice soft, raspy, carrying the faint accent of his Appalachian roots. "I just came to pay my respects." The guard frowned, a flicker of impatience crossing his young face. He had his orders. "We have a list, sir. All attendees must be pre-approved. Are you family?" Arthur shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Served with him," he stated simply. "A long time ago. Desert Storm. First Gulf War." The guard looked him over again, the outdated uniform, the wrinkled hands, the strange, dry flower. He saw a relic, not a guest. He saw a potential problem. "I appreciate your service, sir. But that was a long time ago. Without clearance, I can't let you in. You can wait outside the main perimeter if you wish, across the road." Arthur didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice or attempt to pull rank he didn't officially possess. He didn't try to explain the inexplicable, the bond forged under fire, the debt Sterling had always felt he owed. He simply nodded once, a gesture of quiet acceptance, a resignation born not of weakness but of a lifetime of being outside the gates. He stepped back, finding a spot near the outer wall, partially shaded by an old elm, its leaves just beginning to unfurl in the spring warmth. And there he stood. The breeze tugged at his sleeve. Cars whispered past, their occupants oblivious. He didn't move. He became part of the landscape, silent and watchful. Inside, the ceremony began its solemn, practiced march. The chaplain's voice, amplified, echoed across the green expanse. Rows of generals stood like statues, their faces impassive masks. Foreign dignitaries offered stoic profiles. The Secretary of Defense looked suitably grave. The 21-gun salute cracked the air, each shot a sharp report echoing off the marble. The mournful, heart-wrenching notes of taps drifted over the hills, a sound that never failed to tighten Arthur's chest. But outside the gate, Arthur Jenkins stood alone, the desert rose held steady in his hand. Not angry, not bitter, just present. Waiting as he had learned to do so well, so long ago. He didn't know, couldn't have known, that behind the security line, someone had noticed. It was Major David Chin, aide-de-camp to General James McGregor. Chin was a sharp officer known for his attention to detail, and he was scanning the perimeter, a routine check, when his eyes snagged on the figure by the wall. The uniform struck him first, Desert Storm era, unusual. Then the patch on the shoulder, the Phantom insignia. Chin frowned. He'd only seen that patch in old, highly classified after-action reports, in stories his boss, General McGregor, sometimes told late at night after a few whiskeys, stories about a near-mythical reconnaissance unit, the Phantoms. A group whose exploits were legendary but largely undocumented, whose members often operated alone or in two-man teams deep in enemy territory. Chun raised his binoculars. His eyes narrowed. The bearing, the stillness, and then he saw the thin, white scar running from the man's temple into his hairline, almost hidden by his gray hair. It couldn't be. But there he was. Arthur Jenkins. Ghost, as General McGregor called him. The The man the general credited, in those rare, private moments of reflection, with saving both his life and General Sterling's, pulling them from a fiery wreck under a sky filled with enemy tracers. Chen lowered the binoculars, his heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. He knew what he had to do, protocol be damned. He turned to the three-star general standing ramrod straight beside the casket, a man known for his iron composure and unwavering focus, General James McGregor. "Sir," Chen whispered, his voice tight, barely audible above the solemn music. "You need to see this. At the North Gate. I think it's him." General McGregor turned, his expression a mask of stern grief, momentarily annoyed by the interruption. "Him? Who, Chen? What is it?" Chen pointed discreetly, his hand trembling slightly. "The patch, sir? The phantoms. And the scar. It's Jenkins. Arthur Jenkins. He's outside. They won't let him in." And just like that, everything stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis for General James McGregor. The solemn ceremony, the dignitaries looking on, the carefully prepared eulogy he was meant to give, it all faded into an insignificant blur. He saw only the gate and the man standing there. He remembered a night filled with fire, the smell of burning fuel, the screams, and the sudden, silent appearance of a figure who moved like smoke, whose rifle spoke with deadly precision, whose calm voice cut through the panic and led them to safety. He didn't hesitate. He didn't consult with security or whisper to an aide. He handed off his ceremonial gloves to a stunned Major Chen, adjusted the cuff of his immaculate Class A jacket, and began to walk. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but briskly, deliberately, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path towards the main gate. The honor guard faltered, their rifles wavering slightly. The bugler, poised to play again, lowered his instrument, confused. The chaplain's voice trailed off mid-sentence. Even the crowd, a sea of uniforms and dark suits, seemed to hold its collective breath, turning as one, a ripple of astonishment passing through them to watch the three-star general stride away from the center of the ceremony, his purpose clear and unswerving. He reached the outer boundary, nodded curtly to the bewildered MP who now looked as if he'd swallowed his own tongue, and opened the heavy iron gate himself. He stepped outside, onto the public sidewalk, into the world beyond the official ceremony. Arthur, who hadn't moved in nearly an hour, looked up, startled by the sudden proximity of such high rank, the jingle of metals, the sheer, undeniable presence of General James McGregor. McGregor came to a halt less than 3 feet away. He stood at full, rigid attention, his back straight, his chin high. Then, in front of everyone, before the hushed press pool who were now scrambling, before the rows of soldiers, before the astonished politicians, he raised his hand to his brow and saluted. A sharp, clean, textbook motion, a salute held with unwavering intensity, a salute not of a superior to a subordinate, but the kind reserved for equals, for legends, for saviors. "Sergeant Jenkins," the general said, his voice, usually booming across parade grounds, now thick with an emotion he couldn't and didn't try to hide. "We've been waiting for you." Arthur blinked, the pale blue eyes clouded with a profound confusion. "Sir? I don't have clearance. They said. I was just..." But the general cut him off, a hint of the old field commander in his tone, softened now by decades of gratitude. "With all due respect, Arthur," he said, using the first name, bridging the years, bridging the vast gap in rank and status, to hell with clearance. "You are the clearance." He turned to Major Chen, who had followed him like a shadow, and extended his hand. The major stepped forward, not with a box, but with the American flag, the very flag that had draped General Sterling's casket, the flag that was moments away from being meticulously folded and presented to Sterling's official next of kin. It was a breach of protocol so profound, so stunning, it was almost unthinkable. In front of the silent, watching crowd, General McGregor took the flag, its stars and stripes heavy with symbolism and grief, folded into a perfect, heavy triangle, and handed it to Arthur Jenkins himself. "General Sterling's last request," Arthur, McGregor said, his voice low but carrying in the stillness. "He made me promise. He wanted you to have the flag. He said you earned it more than anyone. He wanted it to go to his brother. To the man who brought him home when no one else could." Arthur stared down at the flag in his hands. It felt impossibly heavy, warm from the sun, resonant with history. His hand trembled, not with age, but with the sudden, overwhelming weight of recognition, a recognition he had never sought and never expected. I thought everyone forgot," he whispered, his voice barely audible, a sound almost lost on the breeze. The general's own voice broke. "We didn't," he said fiercely, his eyes meeting Arthur's. "Bob never forgot. And I never forgot. Not for one day." And behind them, inside the cemetery's inner circle, a small group of older men scattered amongst the crowd began to rise. Men in their late 60s and 70s, some leaning on canes, others standing a little straighter than they had in years. They recognized the patch. They recognized the scar. They recognized the man. They were the phantoms, or what was left of them, the silent warriors, the ghosts of the battlefield. They rose from their chairs, one by one, forming a ragged, impromptu line near the edge of the ceremony. And as General McGregor gently placed a hand on Arthur Jenkins's back and guided him through the now-open gates, carrying the flag of a fallen comrade, each one of them saluted. Not because they had to. Not because protocol demanded it. But because they remembered. Because they knew. Because some debts run deeper than medals, too sacred for regulations. And because heroes, the real, quiet heroes, don't always wear ribbons on their chests, they carry them, heavy and unseen, in their hearts until someone finally remembers to stand up and say, "Welcome home, Sergeant. We see you." The wind shifted as Arthur Jenkins crossed the threshold, stepping onto the sacred grass of Arlington. The flag felt warm, almost alive, in his hands. He walked beside the general, the silence between them filled with more meaning than any eulogy could hold. The crowd parted before them, a path opening as if by an invisible hand. They didn't stop at the main canopy. They didn't join the dignitaries. McGregor led him towards the small group of phantoms standing by an old oak tree, their faces lined, their eyes holding memories of sand, fear, and impossible odds. As Arthur approached, the old soldiers didn't speak. They just looked at him. One stepped forward and clasped Arthur's shoulder, a grip surprisingly strong. Another just nodded, a tear tracing a path through the deep lines on his face. In their presence, surrounded by the only men who truly understood, Arthur finally allowed a small, weary smile to touch his lips. He hadn't come for this, for any of it, but it felt right. It felt like a circle closing. Later, long after the crowds had dispersed, the limousines had departed, and the flags were lowered to half-mast, Arthur and General McGregor stood alone at Sterling's grave. The temporary marker was simple, awaiting the permanent stone. Arthur carefully untied the old bandage from his desert rose and placed the fragile flower beside the marker. "He talked about you, you know," McGregor said quietly, breaking the long, comfortable silence. "Right up near the end. Talked about that night in the desert. We were in a busted Bradley, turret-jammed, comms shot deep inside their lines. We thought we were toast. Then, you. Like a ghost. Picking them off one by one, drawing their fire, leading us through that wadi they'd mined." Arthur looked out over the endless rows of white stones, each one a story, most untold. "Just did my job, sir." "It was more than a job, Arthur." "You know it was," McGregor insisted. He paused, pulling an envelope from his inner pocket. "Bob, he left something else for you. In his will. A trust. It's significant. He wanted you to live comfortably. To know you were appreciated. He felt he owed you everything." Arthur slowly shook his head, a gesture both gentle and firm. "Appreciate it, General. Truly. But I don't need much. I get by. Give it to the boys. The ones coming back now. The ones with wounds you can see and the ones with wounds you can't. They need it more." McGregor looked at the old soldier, at the faded uniform, at the quiet strength that hadn't dimmed, hadn't soured, in over 30 years. He understood. He'd expected nothing less. "All right, Arthur," he said softly. "We'll set up a fund." "The Sterling Jenkins Fund?" Arthur considered it, then offered another small smile. Just call it for the ghosts," he said. "The ones who come back and the ones who don't." He turned, ready to begin the long journey back to Ohio, back to his quiet, anonymous life. "Arthur, wait," McGregor said. "You don't have to disappear again. I'd like to stay in touch. There are people who'd like to see you. The phantoms." Arthur Jenkins paused at the edge of the path. He looked back at the general, then at the grave, then at the vast, silent city of heroes stretching before him. For the first time, a different light seemed to touch his eyes, not relief, not joy, but a quiet, hard-won peace, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since he'd last worn the patch. "Maybe," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "Maybe this time I will." And he turned and walked slowly towards the gate, no longer an outsider, no longer a ghost, but a hero finally, quietly, respectfully acknowledged.